Tonight, you do not need to be perfect. You do not need to hold yourself together or pretend that you have moved on. Sometimes, the deepest peace begins where the heart has broken a little, where forgiveness is not yet complete, where the healing still aches, and where rest feels far away. It is all right. This is where we begin. Take a slow breath in. Feel the air entering the soft space behind your ribs. Let it travel to the corners of your chest where old memories still live. Then exhale gently, as if you are letting go of the day that no longer needs to be carried. Tonight, there is nothing to fix. No past to rewrite. No future to chase. Only this moment, quiet, warm, forgiving. In the Buddhist way, forgiveness is not a duty. It is a homecoming. It is the moment you stop fighting with what has already been and start walking hand in hand with what still is. Healing is not a race. It is the slow unfurling of light in a room it forgot how to glow. And rest true. Rest is when your breath no longer hides from itself. So let this be your place of return. Let the sound of my voice, the rhythm of your breath, and the stories of this night carry you gently into stillness. You do not need to do anything. Only listen, breathe, and allow peace to find you again. If these stories bring you even a small moment of calm, if they help you forgive a little more or sleep a little deeper, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe so that each night you can come back to this quiet corner where words rest, hearts mend, and the soul remembers how to breathe again. And now, as your breath begins to settle quietly in your chest, as your shoulders soften and release what no longer needs to be carried, we begin tonight's journey, where every story is a small step back toward yourself. Let the sounds around you fade into softness. Let your eyes close without effort. Everything you need to understand will come on its own, not through thought, but through the rhythm of your breathing, through the silence slowly opening within you. Somewhere far away, there was once a river that bent and twisted through seasons of rain, through years of flood, through memories it didn't know how to hold except by running faster. It once believed that if it could just flow hard enough, far enough, long enough, it might finally forget what had made its waters muddy. But one day, when the current grew still and the riverbed revealed itself, it saw something it had never noticed before. Wild flowers blooming from the places that once held its pain. Now let us listen to the first story of the night, the river that forgave itself. A story where forgiveness begins not with words, but with a single quiet breath, and the gentle acceptance that even a river must one day learn how to return to itself. The river that forgave itself. The town had learned to live by the sound of water. In summer, the river spoke in an even tone like a careful teacher, laying out a lesson on patience. In winter, it went quiet and deep, a low humming under ice that made you want to pull your scarf closer and lean into the hush. The river's curve held the town the way a palm holds a small bird, not too tight, not too loose, just enough for breathing. On mornings, when work whistles had not yet started, and trucks had not yet rolled over the bridge, a thin mist rose from the surface in slow threads, and you could watch the day stitch itself together. If you stood long enough on the bank, you would notice how the light slid along the water's back, as if smoothing the wrinkles of something old. People said the river remembered everything, but did not keep accounts. It let things pass. It carried what it could, and set down what it must. Still, there were years when storms came, angry and heavy, when logs bruised the piers, when silt choked the reeds, and plastic snagged the roots of willows, and the river looked darker, as though it had swallowed more than it could speak. On such a year, a woman named Mara walked the towpath each evening. She was not old, not young, the way a mid-season feels, past the heat before the frost. Her left hand always ran along the safety rail, as if memorizing the feel of the world, while her right held a small handmade book she never opened in public. The book had 7 thin pages, each stitched with rough blue thread, and each page carried a sentence she had written but could not yet read without trembling. It had been a year of breaking for her, a house emptied, a phone gone silent, a friend who turned away at the moment she'd expected him to turn toward. There were afternoons when she would stand in a grocery aisle, hand on a jar of honey, caught by the sweetness trapped in glass, and feel the tight question rising. How do things that golden stay without fermenting from their own past light? She'd put the jar back, go home, leave the door unlocked because no one came anyway, make tea, and watch the river from her back step as if it were a show put on for her alone, a show about continuity. One evening, near the end of August, when locusts played their thin violins in the trees and air pressed warm as a palm on the skin, Mara noticed that the river moved differently. It wasn't the level. That had fallen the way late summer levels do. It was the attitude, something quiet and peculiar, as if the water wanted to slow where it usually rushed and lean where it usually slipped away. You can say this is imagination, because water has no face. But if you live long by a thing, you learn its moods. She came to the elbow of the river, where years back, a boy had fallen in and been pulled out by a fisherman who later said he didn't save the boy. The river just gave him up. There at the elbow, a fallen cottonwood lay half in the current, half on shore, and the snag had collected a crown of debris, a cracked red gas can, a children's plastic pail, a snarl of fishing line that caught and released with a ghostly patience. Mara stood and watched the water break around all that trouble, and she felt a wave of tiredness so complete that her knees bent without asking. She sat on the grass and pressed her palms, flat, feeling the long cool beneath the green. A deep, underground place that had nothing to do with the irritations of people. The river made its soft rope sound. The sky above it was the color of wheat warmed by old light. She remembered a thing her grandmother used to say, a small sentence with a large doorway. Forgiveness is remembering. You are not the judge of time. As a child, she had thought this meant you shouldn't tattle, or you shouldn't count how many cookies each cousin took. But now kneeling by the river, she felt its weight differently. You could not order the heart to hurry its letting go, because the heart did not live on the clock your anxious mind carried. The heart was tidal and lunar and had its own maps. A blue heron lifted from the far reeds and coasted low, slow legs, trailing like a calligraphy stroke the wind had failed to finish. Its wings were the kind of wide that quiets a person from the inside. When it landed again 50 yards upstream, it did not look back. The river glanced at the bird and went on thinking its old, wet thoughts. Mara let her breath grow long the way she had been taught years ago in a church basement where an old teacher had sat cross-legged and said nothing except listen. She listened. Somewhere a screen door banged and a child laughed. A car took the bridge too fast, and the boards answered with a clatter. Then the small sounds thinned as thin as silk, and under them she heard something plain, the river failing to be angry. It had reasons to be angry. People had used it, taken from it, ignored it, named it after men who had stolen the land around it. They had poured into it. They had forgotten it, then remembered it as a view to sell. The river had swallowed tires, radios, a rusted shopping cart, and the ashes of a woman whose children were not ready to let go. The river did not choose what arrived. It carried. Some days it carried lightly, as if wheeling a suitcase in a smooth airport. Other days it dragged, groaned, stuttered over rock. How then did it go on, offering its face to the sky, taking the shape of each season, without complaint? Mara watched the water find its way around the cottonwood and the trash it had caught, and the finding looked like affection, not for the snag, but for the possibility of a path. That was when she knew what her 7 pages were refusing to say. She wanted to forgive, but she wanted to do it without losing the proof that she had been hurt. She had believed her anger was the archive. If she set it down, who would keep the record? The river kept its record in motion. That was its secret. It did not forget by erasing. It forgot by replacing, by letting silt settle into beds where reeds would rise in spring. You could find the history if you looked and sifted, but you could also sit on the bank and see only the glitter and the sky. Both were true. When Mara finally opened her little book, the blue thread looked like vein under skin. She read the first page, a simple sentence that had once felt like a stone in her mouth. "I wish you had not left the way you did." She flinched at the past tense, like touching a bruise you think is gone. Then she read the second. "I wish I had not tried to make your leaving mean I was unworthy." The words stood on thin paper and did not break it. The third page said, "I cannot carry both your choices and myself." The fourth, "I will not use pain to keep you near." The fifth, "I allow the river to keep its riverness." The sixth, "I allow my heart to be a room with open windows." The seventh was blank. She had never known what to write there. A breeze came from upstream, and the crown of debris trembled. A plastic bottle broke loose, spun twice, and drifted into open water. It did not rush. It moseyed the way the old men walk along fences. It bumped against a stone and then glided on. It was not a beautiful thing, but its release was beautiful because the river did not cheer or announce, did not raise a flag or demand a witness. It simply made space. Mara understood that her blank 7th page did not need a sentence. It needed a gesture. It needed a space where the past could move out of the snag without drama. She ripped the blank page carefully from the thread, not tearing, not yanking, but easing the fibers apart with her fingertip, and laid it on the water. The paper hesitated. She pressed it under with the flat of her palm and let go. It surfaced, darkened, softened, then surrendered, the blue thread unwinding like a tiny river inside a river. She stayed until the locusts' violins were replaced by crickets' steady percussion, and the first shy stars opened. The river's voice lowered as if the day had asked it to whisper. A small holiness thickened in the place between water and air, that thin meniscus where everything touches. Mara breathed with it. She thought of the house she would return to, The windows she would open, even if the night brought noise. The teacup she would set on the sill to collect whatever cool the darkness wanted to offer. She imagined what it would be to let forgiveness be an atmosphere rather than a verdict. She would not stand over her life like a judge on a bench. She would be the room where someone can finally put down a heavy bag. She would be the river that let something float free without asking it to be better first. The next morning, she woke before the alarm, not fresh exactly, but unarmored. Her kitchen smelled faintly of lemons from a bowl on the table. A neighbor's cat sat on the porch rail, tail flipping eyes half-lidded like a monk considering soup. She made oatmeal and stirred in too much cinnamon, then laughed at herself for offering comfort the way a child does sweetly and without restraint. She packed a small bag with her notebook and a pencil and walked to the river again. The cottonwood still lay where it had lain. The snagged crown still held its gulp of the world's carelessness. But something in the angle of light changed everything. Sunlight laid a long stripe on the water and turned the slow foam to an alphabet she did not have to read to understand. She sat where she had sat before and listened again for the sound beneath sounds. People passed on the towpath with headphones and dogs and plans. She stayed village quiet. By noon, an old man with a metal detector approached and asked if she had seen any coins in the grass. He wore a hat that said, "World's okayest grandpa," and a shirt that said, "Team Helen." He swept the detector over the ground, and it made a hopeful ticking, but he found nothing and winced as he stood. "Caught my knee in 78, he said, smiling as if that were the punchline. River was higher then, or I was shorter. He touched the air with his free hand, sketching a height only memory can measure. You ever notice he added how the river feels newer after a bad storm, like it wakes up with a different face? She nodded, and they shared a civility that needed no biography. After he left, she thought newer, not cleaner. There was a difference. To be new did not require expunging what had happened. It required meeting the next moment without insisting it dress like the last. Days became a small string of rituals. She sat with the river each evening and did not force conclusions. Some nights she grieved a little in a soft way, like the ache your teeth carry after a day of cold water. Some nights she felt nothing at all and took that as an answer. Not every hour is a moving hour. She watched a boy learn to skip stones, fail stomp, then suddenly throw a flat one that hopped 4, 5, 6 times and made him shout a triumph so pure the geese startled. She watched a girl collect leaves in a paper bag, then pour them out again, as if the bag could not hold what did not want holding. She watched a pair of lovers argue quietly until they stopped and leaned into the rail with their elbows touching, as if remembering that to be aimed in the same direction can sometimes help more than being in perfect agreement. The river accepted them all and altered for none. It was itself water seeking, the way it is always seeking, and by being itself, it made room for everything to be a little truer. When the first cold came, a clarity came with it. The light tightened. The wind wrote its sharp cursive along the surface. One afternoon, a city crew arrived with a truck and a chain and pulled the cottonwood free of the bank. The snag broke, and the crown spilled its tangle back into motion. The workers joked and swore and did their simple, righteous work. A woman in an orange vest waved to Mara as if to say, "We're helping." And Mara felt a gratitude that surprised her with its plainness. She had wondered if she needed a ceremony to mark the shift inside her. A long walk, a white candle, a prayer pronounced just so. But the world offered its own mundane blessing. A chain clanked, a trunk swung, a man spat in the grass and nodded, and the river opened its shoulder and took a breath. That night, in her kitchen, Mara wrote 3 lines on a new page. Forgiveness is the river returning to river. Healing is the silt learning to grow reeds. Rest is the room that holds both. She did not worry whether the lines were good. She did not show them to anyone. She read them once and then made soup. The steam lifted like a small weather system and fogged the window in a circle that looked like a porthole cut into the evening. Through it, she could see the porch light across the street, blink on, and a figure in a hoodie step out, stretch, and stand for a long moment, looking toward the sound of water. The town exhaled. The night took the day away without fuss. On a Sunday, near the year's turn, Mara went to the small temple on Cedar Street. It was once a laundromat and still smelled faintly of starch when the doors were first opened. Inside, the floor had been sanded to warm wood, and cushions were set out like patient boats. There was a statue of the Buddha at the front, small enough to lift with both arms, large enough to make the room a little steadier. Bells did not ring. They waited. People arrived with their ordinary life on them paint under a thumbnail, a phone that would not stop buzzing, a grief that looked like not speaking. The teacher bowed, and they bowed back. They sat. they breathed. The teacher said only, "Return to what returns to you." Mara thought of the river, how it belonged to the town, and to itself, and to the sky, and to the earth, and how it made no speeches about belonging. She let her breath borrow the river's method. In, out. In, out. A thought, a letting go. Another thought, another letting go. Less fighting, more allowing. She did not forgive a person in that hour. She forgave the premise that she needed to be finished. Spring arrived, not by declaration, but by 1,000 small decisions, sap waking in a maple. A child leaving her coat at school, the river rising a half-inch with rains that smelled like iron and worms. The reeds greened. Geese returned with their bossy throats and soft demands. Under the bridge, the triangles of shadow shifted hour by hour until the old graffiti, pale and polite, now resembled the signatures of people trying to remember who they were. Mara planted herbs in a wooden box by the window, thyme, parsley, basil. She watered each with thrift and attention. On Tuesdays, she met with a friend at the diner, and they did not discuss the past. They discussed muffins. "Forgiveness tastes like cinnamon," the friend said, licking her thumb with ceremony. They laughed, and the waitress laughed with them and refilled their cups with that coffee that is not good and not bad, only loyal. One late afternoon, the first truly warm one, Mara returned to the elbow of the river to find a small crowd gathered. A boy had caught his kite in the branches of a willow, and his father stood on tiptoe with a stick, while two teenage girls proposed solutions that involved physics and bravery. The kite was red with a black star in the center, and it did not look like a thing that wanted saving. It looked like a lesson about height. Mara joined the watching the way you join birdsong, by being quiet. At last, the father lowered his stick, and the girls shrugged, and the boy set his mouth in that firm line that keeps tears from breaking loose. Then a breeze, a generous, cityless breeze, filled the kite where it snagged, and a tiny give traveled down the string to the boy's hand. He felt it, and held, and the kite shook free, dashed up, and found its sky. The boy laughed the laughter that repairs 6 minutes of a small life at once. Around them, the river pretended not to applaud. When they'd gone, Mara noticed among the roots where the snag had been a new thing, the slender green of something fearless, pushing through, not reed, not grass, something whose name she did not know. It wavered in the faint current that touched even the shore, and its smallness did not apologize for being a beginning. she thought of all the times she had waited for a big sign, a clear voice, a pure feeling that would announce, "Now you are healed," as if the heart were a device that could finally boot up. But here was a better announcement, a stem that did not check the sky for permission, a river that kept being river, a town that learned to live by the sound of water. In the months that followed, Mara found that forgiveness had changed the shape of her attention. She noticed the way light took the stairs in her building, one step at a time, as if tired and grateful. She noticed how her neighbor's wind chime lied about the wind ringing in the absence of a breeze, and how even that lie had a kindness to it. She noticed that when a friend told a long story she had already heard, she could let it be an old song sung again, not a test. She noticed that in the mirror, her face still carried the line that appeared the winter. She had cried without stopping for an hour, and that the line had become a feature she loved, like a road, you know. Will take you home. On the rare day a memory returned sharp and unfair, she did not deny it or entertain it. She let it sit in the waiting room of her body until it realized no one would call its name. It was not a perfect life. Lights still burned out at inconvenient times. Emails still arrived with their small thunder of demands. The town council still made bad choices about good trees. But the river kept to its work. When tourists came in July, they took selfies with the bend behind them, and the river accommodated their joy without flattery. When a storm in September sent brown water tumbling shoulder high and the radio warned people to stay back, the river carried a refrigerator for 2 miles, then let it lodge on gravel as if granting it a last known address. When winter returned, the river lowered its voice again and wrote slow letters to ice. The heron remained a patient librarian, keeping hours only the river understood. Somewhere in that steadying Mara's life joined the life around her, not as a dramatic confession, but as a practical tenderness. One night in early winter, standing on her porch, she whispered the sentence that had once felt impossible and now felt like saying her own name. I forgive you. She did not specify who. The plural fit inside the singular. The syllables were ordinary, a cup of warm water, and she drank them. The wind from the river crossed the street and touched her cheek with fingers that had held all the days she would ever have. She went inside, turned off the lamp, and allowed the dark to sit beside her without thinking it was an intruder. In the quiet that followed, which was short and eternal, she heard what she had always wanted to hear. Though it arrived without words, you may rest. And so, the river forgave itself the way it always had, not by apology, but by continuation. It moved through what was placed in it, It learned the weight of each season and did not make an enemy of any. It accepted the moon as a temporary governor and the sun as an old friend who sometimes overstayed. It braided silt with root and root, with bird and bird with sky, until everything that had come to trouble it became a part of what it offered. The town, largely unaware, slept better than it used to. And some mornings, people woke with the strange certainty that they did not need to win an argument to feel whole. They made coffee and tied shoes and opened doors and stepped into days that were not perfect and did not need to be. The river kept speaking its one sentence in 1,000 dialects. You can be what you are, and go on. If you ever visit Walk to the Elbow at dusk, look for the place where the cottonwood once lay. You won't see a monument. You won't find a plaque. You will find a curve of water, remembering nothing and everything at once, and you will feel your breath fall into step with it. Maybe you'll bring a page to let go of. Maybe you'll bring only your hands. Put them on the rail. Feel the grain, and allow for the possibility that the life you have, with its cracked places and late arrivals, is not an error to be corrected, but a current to be joined. If you stand long enough, the day will stitch itself around you, and the light will smooth your edges, and you might hear the smallest sound, a sound you cannot locate, as if made inside the bones of the world. Forgiveness taking off its armor and resting by the water at last. The monk and the shadow. In the highlands, where the air thins and turns silver at dawn, there stood an old monastery carved into the ribs of the mountain. From afar, it looked less like a building and more like an afterthought of stone, a continuation of the rock itself, as if someone had whispered prayers into the cliffs, and they had simply opened to make space. There among walls, the color of time, lived an old monk named Soren. He had been there so long that even the crows no longer startled at his footsteps. His robe had faded from saffron to the pale hue of late wheat. His hands had become the color of the wood he touched. Every morning, before the others rose, he would step out into the narrow courtyard and bow toward the east, where light came slowly like a guest, hesitant to wake the house. Soren's life was simple, but his nights were not. For many years, a small unease followed him into sleep, the kind that does not shout, but sits beside the bed and waits. He never told the others. By day, he taught novices how to sweep without hurry, how to breathe without searching for reward, how to bow to the wind as if greeting a teacher. But when the candles were out and the halls had gone quiet, he saw his own shadow on the far wall, drawn long by the moonlight that slipped through the wooden slats. The shadow seemed darker than it should have been, heavier, as though it held everything he had once buried beneath the silence of his vows. At first, he ignored it. Shadows belong to all things that stand. But some nights, the shadow moved differently from him. When he reached for his cup of water, its hand seemed to hesitate. When he bowed, its spine bent slower, as if reluctant. Soren thought it was fatigue or trick of flame. Yet as weeks turned into months, the shadow became a companion he could neither chase away nor befriend. It reminded him of the days before the monastery, the years when his heart was younger, but his mind wilder, when he had loved a woman who sang by the river and left before the rains returned. He had followed the monastic path soon after, seeking to silence what would not stop echoing inside him. One night, when the moon was full and the courtyard was glazed in silver, Soren sat cross-legged in the meditation hall alone. The floor was cool beneath him, the smell of old incense still floating in the grain of the wood. He closed his eyes, but behind them, the shadow waited. He saw it stretch across the empty floor, saw it sit before him like another monk, and for the first time, it spoke not with words, but with the sensation of breath turning back toward itself. It asked nothing, accused nothing, only lingered. And in that lingering, Soren felt what he had spent decades avoiding: the ache of being human, the impossibility of being entirely pure. He opened his eyes and whispered into the quiet, "Why do you follow me?" The air did not stir. The candles flickered, but did not answer. He looked at the wall again, and the shape there seemed to tilt its head almost kindly. A strange thought rose in him. Perhaps the shadow was not a punishment, but a remainder. The part of him that had stayed behind in the world when he tried to ascend above it. The part that remembered the scent of rain on skin, the sweetness of laughter, not bound by discipline, the grief of things unfinished. For the first time, he bowed not to the Buddha, not to the morning star, but to that dark silhouette resting against the wall. The sound of his forehead meeting the wood was soft, like a bird landing. From that night on, he began to sit differently. When he breathed, he included the darkness in the breath. When he walked, he let the shadow walk beside him, matching his pace. Sometimes, when he washed his bowl at the well, he would see the reflection of both himself and that darker echo rippling on the surface. He realized the water held both without preference, and that perhaps this was what compassion meant to make room for everything that arises without trying to sort it into holy or unholy. The younger monks noticed a change in him. His movements became slower, yet lighter. His laughter, rare before, began to sound like rain on dry leaves. When a novice broke a teacup one morning and trembled, waiting for reprimand, Soren only smiled and said, "The cup has learned to rest in another form." The novice, confused but relieved, bowed and gathered the shards. In the late afternoons, when the mountain cast its long blue shadow over the valley, Soren often climbed to the small platform above the monastery to watch the sky empty itself of color. The wind at that height carried stories from far below voices from the villages, faint songs, sometimes even the cry of a distant market. He listened as if each sound were a bell. One evening, he saw his own shadow stretch far out across the rocks, vast and quiet, and realized it no longer frightened him. It had grown softer, its edges blurred by twilight. It no longer clung, it accompanied. He remembered the woman by the river, not her face, which time had thinned, but the way she used to hum while mending nets. He wondered if forgiveness could move backward through years the way light moves backward through glass. In the calm of that question, he felt something loosen, like a knot coming undone after being wet for too long. He whispered her name once, just once, and then let it dissolve into the wind. Winter came. Snow layered the roofs until the monastery looked like a page left blank. The monks walked slowly along paths lined with footprints that filled as soon as they were made. Soren's hair had turned entirely white by then, and his eyes carried a brightness that did not depend on sunlight. One night, a storm cut the power, and the entire monastery sat in darkness, except for the glow of a single oil lamp in Soren's room. He sat with it for a long time, watching how even a small flame makes shadows dance. Then he reached out and covered the lamp with his palm. For a brief moment, there was no light and no shadow, only the vast stillness that holds both. When the lamp was lit again, his shadow lay quiet at his feet, as if it too had exhaled. He smiled, feeling a kinship that was older than words. Years later, after Soren passed, the monks found in his cell a single line written on a scrap of parchment. Even the shadow bows to light, but light also bows to shadow. They kept it framed on the wall of the meditation hall, not as a lesson to be memorized, but as a reminder of the quiet truth he had lived, that peace is not the absence of darkness, but the friendship between the two. And on clear nights, when the moon leans low and the mountain breathes, the younger monks say, they sometimes see two figures in the courtyard, one robed in light, the other in shade, bowing to each other before the dawn. The Garden of Forgotten Names, at the edge of a small village where fog met the fields each morning like two old friends embracing there, stood a garden that seemed to belong to no one and everyone at once. The path leading to it was narrow, barely visible beneath moss and fallen petals. And yet those who wandered down, it often said they felt as if the earth itself had been waiting for their footsteps. The garden was tended by an old woman named Anya. Her back was bent like the handle of a teepa, her hair thin and white as the breath that rose from steaming soil after rain. She lived in a small house made of clay and quiet, its walls patched with sunlight, its roof stitched together by vines. No sign stood at the gate. No fence kept the world out. And yet, there was a feeling unmistakable that whoever entered was stepping into a place where memory softened its grip. The villagers called it the Garden of Forgotten Names, though no one knew who had given it that title. Some said Anya herself had named it. Others whispered that it was the garden that named her. Every dawn she rose before the birds began their first experiment with light. She lit a single candle on the wooden table near her window, brewed tea that smelled faintly of ginger and wind, and stepped barefoot into the yard. The air was cool, soft, unassuming, the kind of air that did not try to impress you with freshness, but simply reminded you that you were still alive. Her garden was a quiet orchestra of colors and textures. There were rows of plants whose names she had stopped labeling long ago: lavender, that grew beside wild mint daisies, beside night-blooming cereus, and patches of grass that looked silver in the early light. Somewhere near the center was a small pond that never dried, even in the hottest months, as though it too remembered something worth keeping. Anya spoke little, but her silence was not a withdrawal. It was a form of listening. Children sometimes came to the garden to watch her work, expecting the usual instructions. Don't step there or mind the roots. But she said none of that. She simply moved among her plants with a rhythm so calm that they began to mirror it. Her hands wrinkled and strong brushed soil as though it were skin. When the children asked what the flowers were called, she would smile and shake her head gently. They had names once, she'd say, but they grew out of them. This puzzled the children, and truthfully, it puzzled many of the adults as well. In a world where everything had to be known, measured, defined, and owned, how could a flower grow out of its name? Yet those who stayed long enough began to notice something strange. The garden seemed to know when someone came carrying sorrow. Plants bent slightly toward them. Breezes shifted. the air took on a warmth that had nothing to do with weather. And sometimes, if a person stayed long enough, simply sat by the pond, or walked among the rows without speaking, they would feel something slip loose inside them, something that had been clenched for years. Anya had once carried such tightness herself. Long ago, before her back curved and her steps slowed, she had been a school teacher in the same village. She had known every child by name, had taught them to form letters carefully on their slates, to let words find balance before hurrying them into sentences. Her husband, Luca, had been a carpenter who built doors so precisely that when you closed one, it sighed instead of clicked. They had a daughter, Elise, with hair the color of unripe wheat and a voice that could coax sparrows closer. Elise grew up running through this same garden, though it was wilder then, before the world tested the boundaries of her parents' quiet life. War came, as it always does, in some form, and carried with it an invisible hunger that no field could feed. Men were taken, houses burned, names were written on lists that promised return, but seldom kept it. Luca never came back from the line of trees where he was last seen helping others flee. Elise, grown, but still tender, left soon after saying she needed to find work in the city. Her letters came less and less until one day they stopped altogether. Anya kept waiting for footsteps on the path, for a knock, for the shape of her daughter's shadow crossing the threshold. She waited through 3 summers, then 4 winters, until the waiting itself became her prayer. When she could not bear it anymore, she went to the garden and began planting things whose seeds she didn't bother to name. She dug, watered, and listened. At first, it was only a way to keep her hands busy, but slowly, something within the work began to shift. She realized that naming each plant felt like another way of claiming ownership, of trying to keep the world from leaving her again. So she stopped. She decided the flowers could name themselves or not at all. Each bloom became both stranger and dearer to her familiar, not through language, but through presence. One autumn, a young traveler arrived at the edge of the village. He was lean, dusty, and weary. In that way, the soul grows weary when it has carried too many beginnings without a home to end them in. He asked for a place to rest and was pointed toward Anya's house. People said the old woman never turned anyone away. When he arrived, she was pruning a tree heavy with late-season fruit. She greeted him with a nod and motioned toward the bench near the pond. He sat watching her work, unsure if she knew he was there or if he had become part of the scenery. After a while, she spoke. "You've been walking a long time," she said. He nodded. I'm looking for a place I lost. What kind of place? He thought for a moment. Not a town, more like a feeling. Anya smiled faintly. Ah, those are the hardest to find and the easiest to grow. He didn't understand, but her words rested gently in his chest, as if they had been spoken to him long ago in another life. She brought him tea, warm, simple tasting of roots, and they sat in silence as the afternoon folded itself into dusk. The traveler stayed the night in the small room beside the kitchen. The next morning, he woke to birdsong and the smell of wet earth. Stepping outside, he saw Anya already at work, her hands deep in soil, her face serene. He approached, hesitant. Why do you plant so many flowers without naming them? He asked. She looked up, her eyes reflecting a kind of humor that only comes from long practice in not knowing. Because names are how we try to keep things from changing, she said, and nothing good grows from being kept. The traveler knelt beside her, touching the soil. But without names, how do you remember what they are? Anya brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. I don't. I let them remember me instead. He stayed for several weeks, helping her water weed and harvest. He began to notice that each plant seemed to have its own rhythm, some reaching eagerly for the sun, others curling inward like secret keepers. When he asked if she missed her family, she said softly, I do, but I also trust that love does not forget, even when names do. One evening, as twilight settled over the garden and the pond mirrored the first stars, Anya lit a small lantern and placed it by the water's edge. Every soul leaves something behind, she said. A name, a voice, a breath that still remembers how to sing. The trick is not to gather them all, but to let them go so they can find their way back. She handed the traveler another lantern. For whoever you miss. He hesitated, then whispered the name of his brother, a name he had not spoken aloud in years, and placed the lantern on the pond. It floated outward, the flame trembling, but steady. In that moment, something inside him eased not in a burst of light, but in a long exhale that felt like forgiveness. As seasons turned, the traveler left, and others came, some with grief, some with restlessness, all leaving lighter than when they arrived. The garden became a place where the living and the lost could share silence. On certain mornings, when mist drifted low, villagers swore they saw shapes walking among the flowers, figures half transparent, pausing as if smelling their own memories before fading again. Anya never confirmed nor denied it. She simply said, "The garden remembers those who remember gently." Years passed. The traveler returned once much older, his hair streaked with gray. The garden was larger now, wilder, more like a dream than a design. He found Anya sitting by the pond, her lantern beside her eyes closed. For a moment, he thought she was asleep, but when he called her name, she opened her eyes and smiled, as if she had been expecting him. "You came back," she said. "I wanted to see if the flowers still remember." They remember everything she said, except why it hurt. He sat beside her, and they watched the water ripple with wind. "I thought I would forget too," he said quietly. "You did?" she answered, "but only the parts you no longer needed." He laughed softly. "Then what remains? The part that can love again," she said. Later that night, as he prepared to leave, he asked her if she ever found her daughter. Anya looked at the stars reflected in the pond. "She visits sometimes," she said. "Not as you think her footsteps are the breeze, her laughter, the leaves moving. I don't need to see her to know she's home." The traveler bowed, understanding more than words could explain. When he looked up again, Anya had turned her gaze toward the east, where dawn was beginning to stretch its pale fingers through the dark. He walked down the path, the moss cool beneath his feet, and behind him, the garden exhaled, releasing the scent of every flower that had ever been. In the years after Anya's passing, villagers tried to keep the garden alive. They built signs, arranged the beds, cataloged the species, but the flowers began to wither under their careful attention, as though they missed the freedom of being unnamed. One day, after a long dry spell, a young girl wandered in, carrying a small bucket of rainwater she had collected. She poured it onto the soil and whispered, "I don't know what you're called, but I'm glad you're here." By morning, new shoots had appeared, pale and tender, reaching upward without hesitation. The villagers took it as a sign and stopped labeling the plants. Slowly, the garden returned to itself. The pond filled again, the air thickened with fragrance, and at dusk, the wind carried a faint music, half sigh, half hymn. Travelers still came, leaving behind the weight of their names, and the garden received them all as it always had, with neither judgment nor demand. If you go there now, you'll find the same narrow path hidden beneath the moss, the same scent of earth after rain. And if you listen closely while standing among the blooms, you might hear what the villagers swear is the whisper of the old woman herself. Let the world forget your name for a while. It will remember your kindness instead. And as the sun leans over the edge of the horizon, lighting every petal like a small forgiveness, you might understand what Anya knew all along, that love does not live in the memory of names, but in the quiet spaces they leave behind. The lantern, under the rain. There are nights when the rain begins without warning. No thunder, no wind, no ceremony, just a quiet, steady descent, as if the sky has grown too full of unspoken things and can no longer hold them. On such a night, high in the mountains of Kyoto's old forest, a small monastery stood, wrapped in mist. The bamboo groves bowed under the weight of droplets, and the world seemed made of breathing silver. Inside the monastery's inner yard, a young novice named Rio knelt beside a flickering lantern. It was his duty that evening to keep the flame alive until dawn. The wind had already made several attempts to snuff it out, and the rain had begun to fall harder, slanting like brush strokes drawn by an impatient painter. Rio was barely 17. His robe hung a little too loose on his shoulders. His hands still carried the memory of the world he had left soft, hesitant, not yet accustomed to the calm precision of monastic life. He had come to the temple 2 years before, carrying more questions than words. They said his mother had died when he was a child, that his father had gone to war and never returned, and that he had spent his early years moving from one home to another, like a leaf passed along by the wind. When the abbot took him in, Rio believed that peace meant silence, and silence meant forgetting. He thought if he followed the rules, bowed at the right times, and learned the chants by heart, the noise inside him would eventually fade. But on nights like this, when the rain pressed against the eaves and the flame trembled, his mind filled again with all the voices he had tried to bury. He leaned closer to the lantern, shielding it with his palm. The flame danced wildly, its small body breathing between his fingers. "Stay," he whispered, though he wasn't sure whether he was speaking to the light or to something within himself. The air smelled of wet wood and oil. The bell in the main hall had already sounded for meditation, but the abbot had assigned him to the lantern tonight. It was a task given only to the young, those still learning how to hold attention without demanding reward. He pulled his robe tighter and tried to still his thoughts, but the rain had a rhythm that drew memories from him, like roots pulling water from deep ground. He remembered a night long ago hiding under a porch with his mother as rain poured through the broken roof. She had lit a small candle, then cupping it with her hands, just as he did now. The light doesn't fight the rain, she had told him. It just shines where it can. Her voice came back to him so vividly that he almost turned, expecting her to be there. But there was only the sound of rain slipping through the gutters and the faint hiss of water meeting flame. He looked down. The wick had almost gone out. Panic rose in him like sudden thunder. He took the lantern under the overhang, shielding it with his sleeve, and tried to relight it from the spare candle he kept. But the matches were damp. Each strike fizzled into smoke. He tried again, harder, this time, his fingers trembling. The small sparks flared and died in the rain's breath. He bit his lip until he tasted blood. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one in particular, his voice cracking with something deeper than fear of failure. "I'm trying." From the shadows of the walkway, a voice answered, low, calm, familiar. "Then stop trying." Ryo turned. The abbot stood there, holding a paper umbrella that looked as fragile as the night itself. His robe was wet from the knees down, his expression unreadable, though his eyes had the kind of gentleness that made you feel seen without being measured. He approached slowly, as if not to startle the rain. "When you try to keep the light alive by force," the abbot said, "you forget what light is." Ryo bowed quickly, guilt flushing his face. "I failed, Master. I let it go out." The abbot crouched beside him and looked at the lantern. A thin thread of smoke curled upward where the flame had been. "No?" he said softly. The flame only changed its form. "Look," he gestured toward the smoke, winding into the damp air. "Even now, it's still teaching you how to rise." Ryo frowned, unsure whether this was meant as comfort or correction. "But the rule says the lantern must stay lit until morning." "Yes," the abbot replied, "and it will. The morning does not care whether the flame is fire or memory. Your task is not to fight the rain, but to keep your heart from drowning in it." He looked up at the sky, where the rain fell heavier, unhurried. "Come, walk with me." They moved along the covered walkway that circled the courtyard. The abbot's umbrella tapped softly against the air, a rhythm that merged with the rain's endless whisper. The courtyard lanterns flickered in rows, their glow trembling like breaths between prayers. Beyond them, the dark bamboo swayed its leaves, whispering secrets too old for words. "When I was your age," the abbot said, "I once broke the monastery's great bell." Ryo blinked. "You broke the bell?" The old man nodded, smiling faintly. "I thought I could polish its rim to make it sound purer. I struck too hard and cracked it. For months, I hid the pieces behind the prayer hall, ashamed. I thought I had destroyed the monastery's voice. But one morning, the wind passed through the crack, and it made a sound softer and deeper than any I'd heard before. It was no longer a perfect bell, but it was truer. The monks began to call it the wind's bell." Ryo listened the story seeping into him like warmth through cold fingers. So you didn't fix it? There was nothing to fix, the abbot said. Sometimes the crack is where the song enters. They walked in silence for a while. The rain showed no sign of stopping. The sound of their footsteps mixed with the tapping of drops on stone until all sense of boundaries dissolved sky and ground monk and rain thought and stillness. Rio felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't understanding, not yet, but something gentler, something that asked less of him. They reached the far end of the walkway where the roof ended, and the rain fell freely. The abbot stopped and handed Rio the umbrella. "Hold this," he said. Then he stepped out into the rain without it. Rio gasped. "Master, you'll get soaked." The abbot closed his eyes, letting the rain strike his face. His lips moved slightly, though no sound came. When he opened his eyes again, they gleamed with the quiet of a man who had learned the language of water. "Let the rain be rain," he said. "Let the light be light. The moment you stop separating them, they will stop fighting each other." Rio stood under the umbrella, unsure what to do. The abbot extended his palm and said, "Give it to me." Rio hesitated, but obeyed, handing him the umbrella. The abbot smiled and then tilted it upside down, letting it fill with rainwater. Now he said, "Put the lantern under it." Rio placed the small wooden lantern beneath the inverted umbrella. The water poured over the sides, but the space just beneath the center remained dry enough for him to strike a match again. This time, it caught instantly, as though the flame had been waiting for him to stop forcing it. The wick glowed steady, sheltered not from the rain itself, but by the rain's own patience. "See," the abbot said, "the world will help you keep your light if you let it." Rio watched the flame dance within the lantern, its reflection trembling in the puddles around them. Something about that sight, the merging of water and fire, the way both existed without trying to defeat each other, filled him with an unfamiliar calm. He felt the boundaries between fear and trust blur. For the first time, he understood what his mother had meant. The light doesn't fight the rain. It shines where it can. The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go sit by it until dawn. Don't guard it. Don't protect it. Just keep it company." So Rio did. He sat in the courtyard, legs crossed, rain tapping all around him, like gentle fingers on the skin of the world. The lantern burned softly, its glow mingling with the rhythm of falling water. The hours passed, not as hours, but as breaths. Thoughts rose and fell. Memories, regrets, small hopes. and he let them drift through like the rain itself. The flame dimmed at times and brightened at others, and he realized it didn't matter. It was not his to control. It was simply his to witness. By dawn, the rain had thinned to mist. The sky blushed faintly in the east, and birds began their fragile songs. The abbot returned his robe, still damp, his smile gentle. "You kept it alive," he said. Ryo looked at the lantern. The flame was small now, a quiet echo of its former self, but it was still there. "I didn't," he said. "It kept itself alive." The abbot nodded. Exactly. They stood together, watching the morning unfold the courtyard, steaming faintly as sunlight met the remnants of rain. Somewhere beyond the walls, a temple bell rang, a sound so pure it seemed to rise from the mountain's very heart. Ryo felt tears gather in his eyes, though he didn't know why. The abbot placed a hand over his chest. "That," he said, "is the lantern's true light. It burns here." Years later, long after the abbot had passed, Ryo became the one who taught the young monks to tend the lanterns. On rainy nights, he would watch them struggle to keep the flames alive, cupping their hands, frowning at the stubbornness of water, and he would smile quietly. He never scolded them. Instead, he would say, "If the rain wants to fall, let it. If the flame wants to flicker, let it. Your only task is to stay." And sometimes, when the wind blew from the valley and the temple bells echoed against the clouds, he would tilt his umbrella upside down, set a lantern beneath it, and sit for hours watching the two oldest elements of the world meet and make peace. If you ever wander through that forest on a night when the rain begins softly, you might see a faint light among the trees, a single lantern glowing through the mist, held steady by a man sitting cross-legged in the courtyard of an old monastery. It will look small, fragile, almost breakable. But if you stay long enough, you'll realize that the rain never puts it out. It never could. Because it's not just fire. It's the light that comes from learning at last to breathe with the storm. The empty teacup. In the mountain town of Takayama, where the roofs wore snow like folded letters from heaven, there was a small tea house that many travelers passed without noticing. Its door faced a narrow lane of uneven stones, and its sign painted long ago with the characters, "For quiet joy," had faded until the words looked almost like mist themselves. Yet those who found their way inside never forgot it. They would remember the way light filtered through the rice paper screens, soft as breath. They would remember the slow drip of a bamboo fountain outside, and the scent of roasted barley that lingered in the air like an old song that knew how to wait. The tea house belonged to an old monk named Kenji, though few knew he had ever been a monk. He wore no robe, carried no beads, and his head was covered with a thin layer of white hair that glowed faintly in the lamplight. To most, he was simply Master Kenji of the Quiet Joy, a man whose tea was so clear it could make the mind still. But those who stayed longer sensed that the tea house itself was a kind of temple, and that each cup served within it carried a lesson, though never the kind you could learn by asking. Kenji had lived many lives before the tea house. In his youth, he had studied under a strict Zen teacher who believed enlightenment was like climbing a cliff, grueling, absolute, requiring every ounce of strength. Kenji had followed him for years, meditating until his knees burned, fasting until the world swam. But one evening, after a decade of discipline, his teacher told him, "You have filled your cup with knowledge, but there is no space left for tea." That night, Kenji packed a small bag and walked down the mountain alone. He did not return to the monastery again. He wandered for years through cities that smelled of iron and rain, through fields where scarecrows tilted like tired men. He begged, taught, forgot, remembered. And somewhere along that long wandering, he learned the art of making tea, not as ceremony, but as listening. When you pour water, he would later say, you pour time. When he finally settled in Takayama, he built his tea house with his own hands beside a stream, letting the water decide where the walls should stop. One winter morning, a young man arrived at the tea house. He wore fine clothes, the kind that had never known mud, and his sandals were new enough to squeak on the wet stones. He bowed politely, but without humility. "Master Kenji," he said, "I've come a long way to seek your wisdom. I've studied many teachings, read many sutras, but peace still escapes me. Will you teach me how to let go of anger and find serenity?" Kenji looked up from the kettle he was polishing and smiled. "Have you eaten breakfast?" The young man blinked. "Yes." "Then wash your bowl." The young man frowned, not understanding. "Master, I didn't come here for chores. I came for instruction." Kenji poured hot water into a clay teapot. Steam rose between them like a small ghost trying to speak. "Every act is instruction," he said. "But first sit." The young man sat on the tatami mat, stiff-backed, his impatience barely concealed. Kenji placed 2 cups on the low table, one of porcelain, painted with cranes, and the other plain, unglazed, slightly chipped. He filled both halfway, then poured the rest of the tea into the kettle itself and set it aside. "Tell me, Kenji," said, "what do you see?" The young man studied the cups. One is beautiful, the other flawed. And the tea, he hesitated. "It's the same." Kenji nodded. "So it is." He sipped from the chipped cup, then placed it down. "Your anger, your fear, your endless wanting, they are like the porcelain. You have polished them so carefully that you can see your reflection in them. But reflection is not understanding. It is only the surface of the tea." The young man frowned. "Then how do I see what's beneath?" Kenji lifted the porcelain cup and tipped it gently. The tea spilled onto the floor, soaking into the straw mat. When the cup empties itself, the tea returns to the earth. The young man's eyes widened. "But you've wasted it." Kenji smiled. "Then your eyes are still looking at the cup." For a long time, the only sound was the soft dripping of water outside. Snow was beginning to fall again, flakes melting as they touched the tea house's warm eaves. Kenji poured more tea this time, filling only the chipped cup. He handed it to the young man. "Drink," he said. The young man hesitated, but obeyed. The tea was simple, faintly bitter, and yet it carried something beyond flavor, an ease that settled into him like warmth spreading through cold bones. He felt his shoulders drop, without meaning, to his breath, slow. "It's good," he said softly. Kenji nodded. "You see, the tea didn't need perfection. It needed space." They sat in silence for a while. The kettle hissed gently, a soft, living sound. Then Kenji said, "Once when I was a novice, I asked my master how to calm my mind. He took my bowl, filled it with sand, and told me to pour in water. I did, but the water ran off. 'There's no room,' he said. 'Your thoughts are sand.' It took me 20 years to learn that lesson, and another 10 to forget it enough to understand it." The young man furrowed his brow. "Forget it?" Kenji chuckled. "When you hold a teaching too tightly, it becomes another possession. You must let the words dissolve as sugar in tea." A gust of wind brushed against the door. The flame under the kettle wavered, but held. The young man watched it, thinking of all the books he had read, all the lectures he had given, all the times he had tried to control what could not be controlled. He realized he had spent his life filling his cup with explanations, hoping to drink peace through logic. Now in this quiet room, he felt how thirsty he truly was. "Master," he said, "how do I empty myself?" Kenji looked at him kindly. "By seeing that you are never full." The words fell like a drop into still water, soundless, widening outward. The young man didn't speak again. He simply watched the steam rising from his cup until it disappeared, leaving only the faint aroma of barley and calm. The days that followed were unlike any he had known. He asked to stay, and Kenji agreed, giving him a small room behind the tea house. Each morning, they swept the path together, their brooms whispering across the stones. Kenji never offered formal instruction. Instead, he pointed to small things, the way a spider repaired its web after wind, the way the bamboo bent under snow, but never broke, the way tea leaves sank slowly before rising again. At first, the young man tried to interpret everything. The spider represents persistence, he'd think. The bamboo is resilience. But Kenji said nothing to confirm or deny. One evening, as they watched the sunset stain the stream, gold, Kenji said, "When you name what you see, you stop seeing it." They shared tea at dusk, at dawn, in rain, in silence. Sometimes, Kenji would pour the young man's cup until it overflowed, watching the liquid spill without apology. "Why do you waste it?" the young man would ask. "Because waste is another name for control," Kenji would answer. "When you can watch tea spill and feel nothing rise to defend it, then your heart has begun to make room." Spring came. Plum blossoms opened like shy confessions. The young man who had once counted days by goals now counted them by breaths. He found himself listening to small things, the rhythm of footsteps on gravel, the sigh of steam. One morning, while washing cups by the stream, he noticed a crack in the chipped one. He turned it in his hands, worried it might break. Kenji looked over. "Ah," he said, "the cup is teaching you again." "What is it teaching me?" This time, the young man asked. Kenji smiled. "That even broken things can hold what matters, as long as they do not pretend to be whole." That night, after Kenji had gone to rest, the young man sat alone in the tea house. The lanterns cast soft halos on the walls, and the scent of wet soil drifted through the open door. He poured himself a cup of tea, lifted it halfway, then stopped. He looked at the empty seat across from him and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't know whether he was speaking to Kenji, to the cup, or to the silence that had finally become his friend. Years passed. Kenji grew older, and his movements slower. The young man, no longer young, took on the tasks of the tea house. When travelers arrived, he poured tea for them, the way Kenji had, not to impress, not to teach, but simply to share warmth. Some came with heavy hearts, asking for wisdom. He would smile and say, "Have you eaten breakfast? Then wash your bowl." When Kenji finally passed away, he left behind no writings, no sermons, only the tea house and a single note folded under the chipped cup. It read, "Empty often, fill gently, overflow rarely, drink always." The man kept that note for the rest of his life. And on certain nights, when the rain fell against the roof and the world seemed too full of noise, he would sit alone in the quiet tea house, pour a single cup, and let it overflow onto the mat. Watching the tea spread into the straw, he would remember his teacher's soft laugh, the warmth of the kettle, the simplicity of breathing. And as the steam rose and disappeared into the air, he would understand again what Kenji had meant all along. That peace is not something poured into you, but something revealed when you finally stop trying to hold it. If you ever find yourself walking the mountain paths near Takayama on a winter morning, look for a small tea house whose sign is nearly erased by time. Step inside, sit quietly, order nothing. And if the host serves you a chipped cup instead of a fine one, smile, for you are already being taught. Take a sip. Let the warmth spread. You may not know it yet, but in that moment, the tea is not just tea, and you are not just a traveler. You are the cup, the steam, and the empty space that makes both possible. The pillow of clouds. In the quiet hills beyond Kyoto, where the fog rolls down like unspun silk, and the mornings hum with the sound of unseen streams, there was a village that seemed to float between waking and dream. Every roof wore moss like a slow memory, and every doorway opened not just to the road, but to the patient silence of time itself. In that village, there lived an old man named Haru, who had not slept well in 40 years. He was once a scholar in the city, a man who lived among books and voices that never stopped speaking, even when the lamps were turned low. He had written treatises on the impermanence of things debated endlessly about the mind and illusion, and lectured on the art of inner peace, while his own nights were consumed by restlessness. When his wife died, the house grew too wide, the bed too cold, and sleep once, a loyal guest, became an elusive ghost that passed him by. He tried everything: herbal teas, monks' chants, medicines from the market that promised dreamless nights. But nothing stilled the parade of thoughts that marched through his skull long after midnight. So one spring, when the cherry blossoms began to fall like slow snow, he closed his books, locked the city door, and followed a narrow road that led him back to the hills of his youth. There, by a stream that whispered like an old friend, he built a small house with 3 rooms, one for sleeping, one for eating, and one for silence. "If peace cannot find me," he said to no one, "perhaps it can at least pass by and rest a while. But the insomnia followed him. Each night, as the wind rustled the bamboo and the frogs began their solemn orchestra, Haru would lie awake, counting the spaces between breaths. The ceiling became his calendar, the shadows his clock. He would rise before dawn, exhausted, boil water for tea, and watch the mist climb from the fields, like the souls of his unquiet dreams. One afternoon, while walking to the village market, he saw a young monk seated beside the path, repairing the strap of his sandal. The boy looked no older than 20, his robe patched and sun-faded, his face carrying the kind of ease that comes only from having nowhere to arrive. Haru stopped. "You look peaceful," he said. "Tell me, do you sleep well?" The monk smiled without looking up. "As well as the clouds," he said. Haru frowned. "Clouds do not sleep." "Ah," the monk said, tying the last knot. "Then perhaps I don't either." He lifted the sandal, tested the strap, and rose to bow. "Peace to you, old man." But Haru followed him. "Wait, what did you mean by that?" The monk turned his eyes bright with something both playful and deep. "When clouds rest," he said, "they do not stay still. They drift. They do not choose the wind. They follow it." He gestured to the sky. "That is how I sleep when I stop choosing where to go." Haru laughed softly. "And what does one need for that kind of sleep?" The monk shrugged. "Perhaps only a pillow soft enough to float." Then he bowed again and walked on his bare feet, making almost no sound. That night, Haru sat in his small room and thought about the monk's words. He looked at his bed, a simple futon folded neatly by the window, and the pillow stuffed with buckwheat hulls that crackled whenever he moved. "A pillow soft enough to float," he murmured. He untied the pillowcase, poured out the hulls, and filled it with air by shaking it in the lamplight until it was empty. Then he lay his head upon it. It was, of course, nothing but cloth, a small, hollow cloud. But for the first time in years, he did not fight the weight of the world pressing down on him. He let the pillow collapse beneath him, let his breath carry him where it wished. He did not sleep that night. Not fully, but something in him rested. It was as though the long parade of thoughts still marched, but softer, without drums. They came, they passed, they dissolved into the horizon of his mind. In the morning, he brewed tea and felt a kind of brightness behind his eyes. The air smelled cleaner. The world, for once, did not seem to need him to understand it. That evening, he walked back to the same spot where he had met the young monk, but the path was empty. Only the wind moved scattering petals across the road. He waited a while, then smiled, realizing he had not truly expected the monk to appear again. Still, he bowed to the space where the monk had sat. "Thank you," he whispered. The days passed. Each night, he lay his head upon the empty pillow and practiced the art of drifting when thoughts came. Memories of his wife, the regrets of missed words, the echo of students reciting lessons he did not push them away. He imagined them as clouds, one gray, one golden, one torn by wind, one fading into blue, some heavy, some light, some that stayed, some that vanished. He noticed that the harder he tried to catch them, the faster they moved. The more he let them be, the gentler they became. One night, near the full moon, he dreamed for the first time in many years. In the dream, he was standing on a field of sky, and his wife was there, not young, not old, simply herself. She held in her hands a folded cloth that shimmered faintly. "You've finally come home," she said, and handed him the cloth. "Keep this dry, even in the rain." When he opened it, it was the pillowcase he slept on each night. He looked up to ask her what she meant, but she had already begun to fade into the white mist rising from the ground. He woke before dawn, his face wet with tears he did not remember shedding. Outside, the first birds were calling, and the air smelled of wet pine. He lifted the pillow, turned it over, and saw that it had gathered a thin layer of dew through the open window. "Even the clouds get rained on," he said, softly, smiling. From then on, Haru's insomnia no longer felt like an enemy. Some nights he slept deeply, others only dozed between waves of thought, but all nights were bearable. He learned to walk outside when he could not sleep, to watch the moon move through the bamboo like a slow companion. He began sketching again, simple lines of ink on paper. Nothing fancy. Clouds, mostly. Always moving. Sometimes, if the mood took him, he would paint a single pillow floating among them. One evening, a traveler came to his house, seeking shelter from a sudden storm. Haru welcomed him in brewed tea and gave him the spare futon. The traveler, weary and shivering, sighed. "I haven't slept in weeks," he said. "My head feels too heavy with worry." Haru nodded, setting the cup before him. "Then let it drift a while." The traveler frowned. "Drift." "Like clouds," Haru said, and smiled. "Do not ask the wind to stop." Later that night, the storm softened into steady rain. The traveler lay awake for some time, watching the old man seated by the window, sketching in the dim light. "Master," he whispered, Why do you stay awake if you have learned to sleep? Haru looked up. Because sometimes peace comes not to those who close their eyes, but to those who learn how to see without looking. The traveler didn't understand then, but in the morning, he found Haru asleep at the table, his head resting on the empty pillow, the sketch of clouds beneath his cheek. Years turned like seasons. The villagers came to know Haru as the man of the cloud pillow. Some came to him with troubles, and he listened without advice. Others came just to sit on his porch and share silence. It was said that whoever sat with him long enough began to feel lighter, as if the heavy weather inside them had begun to thin. When Haru grew too old to walk the village, children brought him stories from the fields. They told him of how clouds changed shape from day to day, once like a crane, once like a mountain, once like a teacup. He would laugh and say, "Ah, so they are still teaching." On the last morning of his life, the sky was filled with white, and the air was still. The villagers found him lying on his futon, the pillow under his head, his face calm. By the window, a sheet of paper fluttered in the breeze. It was his final sketch, a small figure sleeping on a cloud, lines so light they almost vanished into the page. Beneath it, he had written in careful brushstrokes, "When the sky grows tired, it does not close its eyes. It becomes the sea." They buried him on the hill, overlooking the stream, and each spring, mist gathers there like a slow sigh. Travelers passing through sometimes stop saying the place feels unusually gentle, as if the air itself were breathing slower. On certain evenings, when the clouds drift low enough to touch the roofs, villagers claim they can hear a voice from the hills, soft, steady, laughing like rain. Rest where you are. You are already the sky. And if you ever find yourself sleepless sitting by a window as the night deepens, look at the clouds moving past the moon. Let them wander without needing to arrive. Then lay your head on whatever pillow you have. Breathe once for the earth and once for yourself. And remember the man who learned to sleep by forgetting how. Because peace, like the clouds, never stays still, and yet it never truly leaves. The silent bell. There was once a temple high on a mist-covered hill, where the sound of a bell used to travel for miles. The villagers below said it was not made of metal, but of time itself, each strike a ripple that reached the heart before the ear. Every dawn, the monks gathered to ring it, and the sound, deep calm, endlessly circular, became the spine of their days. Even the crows on the rooftops seemed to pause mid-call when it sang. But one winter, lightning struck the tower. The bell cracked down its middle like a heart that had held too much sound. It gave one last trembling note and fell silent forever. The abbot, an old man whose eyebrows had turned white as ash, decided not to replace it. "A bell that cannot ring still teaches," he said. "We must learn to hear what no longer makes a sound." And so the tower stood empty. Moss grew where the bronze once hung, and the wind made its own songs through the hollow frame. The villagers missed the bell's voice. They said the mornings felt thinner, now the air less certain of itself. But in the monastery, the silence began to bloom in strange and beautiful ways. Among the monks was a young novice named Ren. He was small, curious, full of unspent energy that often spilled out in questions. He wanted to understand everything: the sutras, the stars, even the exact number of drops in a single rain. When the bell broke, Ren was the one who grieved most. Every morning, he climbed to the tower and touched the cracked metal, as if testing whether it could still remember its old song. "Master," he once asked, "why don't we cast a new bell?" The abbot smiled. "Because a broken thing can show you what sound really is." Ren didn't understand. How could silence be a teacher? How could absence hold meaning? But the abbot offered no further explanation. And so Ren kept climbing, touching the bell's cool surface, hoping one day it would speak again. Seasons passed. Spring painted the hill with wild flowers. Summer brought storms that whispered through the corridors. Autumn dressed the world in gold, and winter stripped it bare again. Each change in weather seemed to breathe differently through the broken bell. In the rain, it hummed softly. In frost, it glimmered like a throat that still wanted to sing. One fog-drenched evening, Ren was sweeping the courtyard when a traveler arrived. A woman wrapped in a blue shawl, carrying a small wooden box. She bowed deeply. "I have come to hear the bell," she said. Ren hesitated. "The bell no longer rings," he replied. "Then perhaps it is I who must listen. Differently," she said. He led her to the tower. The cracked bronze loomed like a sleeping giant, its surface carved with old sutras, half erased by time. The woman set her box down and opened it. Inside was a small tuning fork, silver and simple. She struck it against the wooden step. The note it made was thin, but pure like a drop of water, landing in stillness. She held it near the bell's crack. To Ren's astonishment, the bell answered. Not loudly, not even audibly, but as a vibration so subtle it trembled through the air, through his ribs, through the soles of his feet. He stared. "It still sings," he whispered. the woman smiled. All sound waits to be remembered. The bell has not forgotten what it means to be whole. It has simply learned another way to speak. That night, long after she left, Ren couldn't sleep. He sat in the tower, listening to the wind and the invisible echoes that seemed to move within the silence. He struck the bell lightly with his finger. It gave no sound, yet something inside him stirred like a long breath finally exhaled. He began visiting the bell each evening, sitting beside it in meditation. He noticed how the air changed when he was calm versus when he was restless. He noticed that sometimes the silence itself seemed to bend, becoming warm or vast or full of color. He started to wonder if the bell had ever been the source of sound at all, or if it had only awakened what already existed in the listener. Months later, the abbot found him there and sat beside him. For a while they said nothing. Then Ren spoke. "Master, I think I can hear it again." The abbot smiled. "Describe it." Ren hesitated. "It isn't sound exactly. It's more like the moment before sound, the pause that makes hearing possible." "Ah," the abbot said softly. "Then the bell has taught you." Ren looked at him. "But I don't understand what it means." The abbot reached out and placed a hand on the cracked bronze. When the bell was whole, he said its sound stopped at the edge of hearing. It traveled outward. But now that it is broken, the sound travels inward. Each time you sit in silence, it rings again, not in the air, but in your heart. That night, the fog rolled in thick as milk. The monastery seemed to float inside a dream. The monks gathered in the main hall for evening meditation. No bell marked the hour, yet all of them felt the moment arrive. Ren sat among them, his breath slow and even. Somewhere in the distance, a drop of rain fell from the eaves, then another. Each tiny sound folded into the stillness, like brush strokes into an empty canvas. He felt the cracked bell vibrating quietly inside his chest, and in that vibration was everything: sorrow, gratitude, the memory of his mother's laughter, the patience of mountains, the stillness between heartbeats. He realized then that silence was not the absence of sound, but the presence of all things waiting to be heard. Years went by. The bell remained in its tower, gathering moss and rain. Pilgrims still came to see it, though none struck it anymore. They would stand beneath it and listen, some for minutes, some for hours, until they felt something move inside them that words could not reach. The villagers below began to say that the temple had found a new bell, one made of silence so deep that it could calm even the most restless heart. Ren grew older, his hair silvering like the dawns he had watched from the tower. When the abbot passed away, the monks chose Ren to lead them. On the day of his ordination, he climbed the hill alone before sunrise. The air was cold and smelled faintly of pine and rain. He touched the bell again, tracing the crack with his fingertips. "Thank you," he whispered, "for never ringing and yet always speaking." He bowed not to the bell as an object, but to everything it had taught him, to the quiet spaces between breaths, to the patience of listening without needing to reply, to the strange mercy of imperfection. As he descended, the first light of morning spilled over the valley. For a moment, it caught the bell's surface, and the crack gleamed like a river of gold. Down in the village, someone looked up and thought they heard a single, distant chime. It could have been the wind. It could have been their imagination. But for the rest of that day, the whole valley moved more slowly, as if walking in rhythm with something too gentle to measure. In the years that followed, Ren would sometimes sit by the tower in the evenings, eyes closed, hearing the bell that no longer made a sound. When novices asked him how to find peace, he would smile and say, "Stop looking for noise in quiet, and stop looking for quiet in noise. Just listen to what remains when you stop naming what you hear." And when he grew old and could no longer climb the hill, he asked to be carried there one last time. The monks laid him beside the bell. The night was clear. The stars looked close enough to touch. Ren placed his palm on the cold bronze and closed his eyes. His last breath left him without struggle, soft, weightless, almost inaudible. But those who stood nearby swore that as he exhaled, the bell trembled once and gave a single note, low, pure, infinite, that rolled down the mountainside and lingered long after the wind had stopped. They say that if you climb that hill on a misty morning and stand very still, you can still feel it. Not in your ears, but somewhere deeper, where the world becomes wider and names no longer matter. The bell's silence will touch you, reminding you that the truest sound is the one that keeps the heart awake long after everything else has fallen quiet. And as you walk back down the mountain, itself seems to breathe with you, whispering the only sermon it ever knew. What is broken can still sing, and what is silent can still be heard. The bridge of returning light. There was once a narrow bridge made of wood and stone that crossed a quiet river on the outskirts of a forgotten town. It was not famous, nor was it grand. In the rainy season, its boards swelled and creaked. In winter, Frost climbed its rails like pale vines. To those who lived nearby, it was simply the bridge, a way to get from one side to another, a passage between fields and homes, between errands and small routines. But at dusk, when the last light of the sun lingered low and the mist began to rise from the water, the bridge turned gold. The villagers would stop for a moment, their burdens briefly forgotten, and watch how the planks seemed to glow from within, as if remembering something divine. For years, no one knew who tended it. People said the bridge repaired itself, that a missing board would return overnight, that the broken railing would somehow mend before morning. But if one rose very early, before the sky even hinted at blue, one might see an old man standing there, brushing dust from the wood with a reed broom, humming a tune that had no beginning and no end. His name was Akira, though few called him that. Most simply said, the bridge keeper. He had lived by the river his whole life. As a young man, he had worked in the city building houses for others, laying bricks that never bore his name. He was known for his precision, for the way his hands could find harmony between stone and air. But his eyes had always turned toward water. When his wife fell ill and passed away, he returned to this village, the one where he was born, where the river still carried the same cool scent it did when he was a boy. He built himself a small hut near the bridge and began tending it without being asked. He mended loose planks, replaced ropes, swept fallen leaves, and painted the rails with oil when the weather turned dry. At first, the villagers found it odd. Why care for something that belongs to everyone? They asked. Akira only smiled. Because everyone crosses, but no one listens, he said. Years drifted by. The world beyond the town grew louder. Cars, machines, news that never stopped. But the bridge remained unchanged, simple and still. Akira aged with it. His back bent slightly. His beard grew like wind-blown snow. Yet his movements never lost their grace. He carried the same broom, the same lantern, the same quiet devotion. At night, he sat by the railing, watching the reflection of stars tremble on the surface of the water. Sometimes, he thought he could hear his wife's voice in the current soft teasing, saying the things she used to when he worked too much. You build bridges, she'd say, but never cross them. One summer, a storm came that no one expected. The clouds had been gentle that morning, and the fields shimmered with heat. But by afternoon, the wind rose and twisted itself into something fierce. The river swelled and struck the banks like a beast shaking free of its chains. The bridge groaned. Akira rushed out into the rain lantern in hand to check the ropes. The villagers shouted from their doors for him to come back, but he did not hear them. The rain drowned everything. He worked all through the night, tying knots, hammering wedges, driving his bare feet into the slippery boards. And when dawn came, bruised and pale, the bridge still stood. But Akira did not return home. They found him sitting on the far end, soaked and still. His broom beside him, the lantern extinguished. He was alive but silent, as if the storm had taken his voice. From that day on, he never spoke again. People visited, brought him food, tried to thank him, but he only bowed in silence. Some said he was broken by fear. Others said he had heard something in the storm that could not be repeated. Children whispered that the river had told him its secret, and he had promised to keep it. Whatever the truth was, Akira remained on the bridge. Over the following months, something strange began to happen. When people crossed at dusk, they heard faint music, not from instruments, but from the bridge itself, as though the boards hummed softly underfoot. The sound was not the same for everyone. Some heard a lullaby from their childhood. Some heard wind through pine trees. Some heard nothing at all, yet left feeling lighter, as if they'd set something down without realizing it. Akira spent his days watching. He swept, repaired, nodded at travelers, but never spoke. The villagers grew used to his silence and began to call the bridge of returning light. It became a place where people went not just to cross, but to think, to breathe, to forgive. Lovers reconciled there. Old friends met again. Children threw petals into the current and swore their wishes traveled faster downstream. Then one autumn evening, as the air turned thin and the first leaves began to fall, a young woman arrived from the city. She was tired in the way that no amount of sleep could cure. Her name was Aya. Her mother had died 2 weeks earlier, and though Aya had cried at the funeral, her tears had felt mechanical, dry at the center. The city moved too fast for grief. She came to the village only because her mother had once lived there long ago and had spoken of a bridge where she used to sit as a girl watching the sun set. Aya found it easily, the same curve of rails, the same slow river. But it was Akira she noticed first. He stood near the center, leaning on his broom, the lantern beside him, looking down into the water. His silence seemed heavier than the mist, and yet, when she stepped onto the bridge, she felt herself exhale for the first time in days. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Did you know her?" "My mother. Her name was Emiko. She lived here before I was born." Akira turned his gaze toward her. His eyes were kind, full of weather and light. He did not nod, but he did not deny it either. He reached into his robe and took out a small folded paper. He handed it to her with both hands. Aya opened it. Inside was a pressed camellia flower, withered but intact, and beneath it, written in brush ink, a single line: "The river keeps what we forget to love." Her breath caught. Did she write this? Akira only smiled and pointed toward the horizon where the sun had begun to sink. The bridge glowed gold again, and for a moment, Aya thought she saw her mother's silhouette standing beside him, watching the light dissolve into water. She came back every evening after that. Sometimes she brought tea, sometimes only silence. They never spoke, but slowly her grief began to loosen like frost melting from stone. She realized that Akira's silence was not emptiness, it was listening. When he stood there, the air itself seemed to breathe slower, as if waiting for something sacred to pass. One evening, as winter approached, Aya arrived to find the bridge empty. Only the broom leaned against the rail, and the lantern sat unlit on the wood. She called out, searched both banks, but the old man was nowhere to be found. The next morning, the villagers found his sandals neatly placed on the far end of the bridge, facing the sunrise. Beneath them lay his broom, and a note written in the same careful hand. The bridge knows how to hold itself now. They never found his body. Some said he walked into the river. Others believed the river had carried him home. A few said he simply became the light that touched the water each dusk. The villagers continued to tend the bridge after he was gone, though none swept it with quite his tenderness. Yet it endured. The music remained. When the wind blew at certain angles, you could still hear faint humming, the sound of footsteps meeting forgiveness, the rhythm of wood remembering care. Travelers said that crossing it felt like waking from a long sleep. Years later, Aya built a small bench at the end of the bridge. She visited often, sometimes bringing her own daughter. "This is where people learn to return," she would tell her. And when the child asked what that meant, she would smile and say, "You'll understand when the light changes." On the anniversary of her mother's death, Aya sat alone on the bench, the river, whispering below. The evening sun turned the bridge to gold once more. She closed her eyes and thought of Akira, the old man, with his quiet hands, his lantern, his vow of silence that had somehow spoken louder than any prayer. And as the wind brushed her hair, she heard it, the faintest chime, low and pure, rising from beneath the boards. It was not the sound of metal or wood. It was the sound of presence, the sound of something living on through care. Aya opened her eyes, and for a brief moment she saw him there, again sweeping the light from one side of the bridge to the other, as though polishing the path between worlds. She bowed her head, and in that small act the years folded together. Her mother's laughter, the old man's silence. The first day she crossed this place with her heart still heavy. All of it became one soundless note of gratitude. When she finally rose to leave, she looked back and saw the bridge glowing, not just from the sun, but from within the wood, alive with memory, the river below reflecting it like an open eye. If you were to visit that village today, the bridge still stands. The boards are worn smooth by countless footsteps, and at dusk, the light still returns, as it always has, quiet, forgiving, endless. The villagers still speak of the man who kept it standing through storms and silence, though no one remembers his real name. Some say he was a spirit of the river. Others say he was just a carpenter who understood what devotion means. But if you stand there long enough, when the air begins to cool and the world slows down, you may hear the faint humming that hides between water and sky, the song of the bridge that learned to glow by remembering how to listen. And perhaps in that moment, you will realize what Akira must have known all along, that we build bridges not to cross the river, but to meet ourselves halfway. The house that breathed with the wind. At the far edge of a coastal town where the sea's voice never stopped speaking, and the gulls seemed to circle in slow meditation, there stood a house that looked as though it had grown from the sand itself. Its walls were made of cedar, turned silver by salt, and its windows were always half open, as if the house were perpetually listening. The locals called it the breathing house, because even when no one was inside, its curtains moved with the rhythm of the wind, a slow inhale when the tide came, in a soft exhale when the tide went out. The house belonged to a man named Sato. He was neither young nor old, the kind of age where the body begins to move at the pace of thought. He had come to this law after years of living in the city, years that had filled him with things that seemed important at the time: meetings, deadlines, plans, noise. There had been a wife once, and a son, and a small apartment with thin walls where laughter and arguments echoed equally. But the years, as they do, took their share. His wife passed quietly. One spring, his son left for another country, and Sato found himself surrounded by clocks that only measured loneliness. So one morning, when the dawn light brushed his window, he packed what was left of his life into 2 boxes and took the train toward the sea. He arrived with no plan, only a desire to live somewhere that didn't hurry. He found the small, wind-worn house for sale on the edge of the dunes, half buried in grass. And when he stepped inside, the smell of cedar and ocean air wrapped around him like something remembering his name. "Yes," he said aloud, though no one was there. "This is enough." He spent his first weeks cleaning and repairing what the wind had forgotten. The shutters creaked like old monks bowing. The floorboards sighed with each step, and the walls hummed when the gusts grew strong. But there was peace in it. Each nail he hammered felt like a heartbeat returning. Each evening, when the sky turned blue-gray and the sea reflected the moon, he would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the world breathe the tide rising, the reeds bending, the house exhaling through its windows. On one such evening, as he sat listening to the waves, he heard a faint tapping from the far end of the house. It was not the wind. It was more deliberate, more like fingers drumming softly on wood. He followed the sound to the back room, the smallest one, a place he had not yet entered since moving in. Inside, dust hung in the air like sleep. The tapping came from a shutter that had been nailed shut. He pulled the nails free and opened it. The wind rushed in, carrying the scent of seaweed and rain. As the window swung open, something small and white fell from the frame. It was a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. He opened it carefully. The writing was faded, but he could still read the words. "If you are reading this, please leave the window open. The wind knows the way home." There was no name, no date, only that single line. Sato smiled and placed the paper on the table. From that night onward, he kept the window open. Days became months. The wind came and went like a quiet teacher rearranging small things. It moved his curtains, toppled a vase, made the chime by the door sing without pattern. At first, Sato tried to fix these disturbances. He weighed down the vase, closed the shutters, halfway, tied the chime with string. But the more he resisted, the heavier the house began to feel. So one morning, he stopped resisting. He let the wind do as it wished. The vase fell again, but did not break. The chime sang more softly, and the house seemed to grow lighter, as though exhaling after a long-held breath. He began to notice other things. The sound of the waves matched the rhythm of his pulse. The light through the windows changed color, with his moods pale when he was lonely, golden when he felt at ease. Some nights, when sleep would not come, he would walk barefoot through the rooms, feeling the boards beneath his feet expand and settle like the lungs of a great sleeping animal. "You're alive," he whispered and swung to the house, and the curtains stirred in answer. One afternoon, a storm gathered from the sea. The air thickened. The gulls vanished inland. The wind rose from a murmur to a roar. The sky turned the color of slate. Sato watched from the porch as the first drops fell slow, fat, inevitable. He closed most of the windows, but left one open, the one from the note, because he could not bring himself to seal it. Rain blew sideways through the gap, spattering his walls. The house moaned under the wind's weight. Then came a great crash from the roof, and darkness swallowed the lights. For hours, he sat by the doorway, listening to the storm move through the house like a visitor searching for something it had lost. The wind was not angry, he realized. It was simply restless, old, burdened by the endless task of carrying voices of the sea, the trees, the dead, the living. He thought of his wife, then how she used to hum while folding clothes, how her hair always smelled faintly of lemon. He thought of his son, who sent postcards with mountains, but never pictures of himself. He thought of all the words he had meant to say and never did, and all the apologies that had no address. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. The air was washed clean. The light through the broken roof was gentle, almost shy. Sato climbed a ladder to inspect the damage. A section of the ceiling had caved in, but the window, the one with the note, was still open, unbroken. He smiled at that. "The wind found its way home," he said. That night, he took the fallen cedar boards and carved them into a small wind chime. Each piece he shaped by hand, sanding until the edges were smooth as memory. When he hung it near the open window, it made a sound like a whisper being answered low round endless. From then on, he began to speak to the wind as if it were an old friend. "How is the sea today?" he would ask while sweeping. "Do the mountains still wear snow?" Some nights, when he felt lonely, he would light a candle by the window and say, "If you see her, tell her I'm still here." The wind always answered in its own way. A soft gust, a creak of the eaves, a curtain brushing his shoulder like a hand. Years passed. The town grew busier, the fields thinner, but the house remained the same. Travelers sometimes stopped and asked to rest there. Sato always welcomed them with tea and silence. One evening, a young woman arrived, carrying a satchel and a weary heart. She was an artist, she said, traveling the coast to paint the color of wind. But the wind has no color, Sato said gently. That's what I've learned. "Maybe not," she replied, "but it leaves traces." She stayed for several days, painting the sea, the dunes, the house itself. Each morning, she would set up her easel near the open window, and each night she would sit with Sato on the porch, listening to the waves. One evening, she asked, "Why do you keep that window open, even in the rain?" Sato told her about the note. When he finished, she was silent for a while. Then she said, "Maybe it wasn't left for you. Maybe the wind leaves messages the same way people do not, knowing who will find them." He liked that idea. Then, perhaps we are all houses waiting for the right breeze. Before she left, she gave him one of her paintings, a swirl of pale blue and white, almost abstract. "It's not the wind," she said, "but it's the space it leaves behind." After she was gone, Sato hung the painting beside the window. Over time, the colors faded until they matched the walls. He didn't mind. Everything beautiful he had learned eventually becomes part of the background. When winter came, his health began to fade. The sea air grew colder, and his hands shook when he held his cup. Still, he refused to leave. The neighbors checked on him, often bringing food and firewood, but he always said the same thing: "The house takes care of me," and it did. The walls held warmth longer than they should have. The roof stopped leaking, though no one repaired it. The chime by the window sang every night, even when there was no wind. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Sato sat by the open window with a blanket over his knees. The sea was dark, the horizon invisible. He thought about how many years he had lived, and how much of that life had been spent waiting for success, for forgiveness, for sleep. And now, as the air grew quiet, he felt no need to wait for anything. He whispered into the dark, "If the wind knows the way home, perhaps I do too." That night, he dreamed of the sea pulling back its waves, revealing a long path of silver sand that stretched into the sky. His wife stood there barefoot, smiling. "You took your time," she said. He laughed. The wind was slow. She took his hand, and they began to walk, leaving no footprints behind. In the morning, the villagers found the door of the house wide open. The fire had gone out, and the wind was moving gently through the rooms, carrying the faint scent of cedar and tea. Sato's blanket was folded neatly on the chair, and beside it on the table was the note he had once found. Only now new words had been added in his handwriting. "The wind has shown me the way. The window can close now." They buried him on the hill overlooking the sea. For weeks afterward, the house remained silent. Then, one evening, as the sun fell behind the waves, the chime by the window began to sing again, not wildly, but softly, like someone humming while they worked. The villagers said the house had begun breathing once more. If you visit the coast today, you might find it there, still a small house made of silvered wood, its windows slightly open, its curtains swaying as though moved by invisible hands. Step inside quietly. You'll smell cedar and salt, and you'll hear the sound of air moving through the rooms, a steady rhythm, like a heart still beating. Sit by the window for a while. Listen. You may hear the wind telling you what it told Sato long ago, that nothing truly leaves, that every voice finds its way home, and that even silence has a pulse if you're willing to feel it. And when you leave, close the door gently. The house will keep breathing. The sea will keep answering. And somewhere, the wind will carry your footsteps until they become part of its endless song. The clockmaker of stillness. At the center of a small mountain town where fog unrolled like silk each morning and bells from the temple drifted down the valley like slow thoughts, there stood an old clock shop tucked between two plum trees. Its windows were dusted with time, and through them one could glimpse dozens of clocks, tall, small, golden wooden, some shaped like birds, others like moons. They all ticked differently, like a crowd of polite strangers, each with their own heartbeat. And yet, when you listened long enough, a kind of rhythm emerged, one that was neither fat nor slow, but exactly the speed of breathing. The shop belonged to an old man named Hiroto. He had lived there for more than 50 years, though no one could remember exactly when he arrived. The townspeople said he had once been a clockmaker for a great city firm, that his work had traveled across oceans, adorning towers and stations. Others whispered that he had retired early after his wife's passing, escaping the noise of the world to live among his quieter creations. No one ever saw him rush. No one ever saw him angry. His face held that kind of calm which seemed less like peace and more like an old sadness that had finally learned to rest. Each morning, he would open the shop before sunrise. He swept the wooden floor, polished the brass faces, wound each clock with patient fingers. Then, when the light turned gold, he would make tea, sit by the window, and listen, not to the clocks themselves, but to the space between their sounds. He said that was where real time lived. Most days passed without visitors. The few who came were usually travelers who'd lost their watches or villagers wanting a repair. Hiroto never charged much. Sometimes he refused payment altogether, saying, "Time repairs itself. I just help it remember how." When asked why he stayed in such a lonely place, he would smile and reply, "A clock can only sing in silence. But there was one visitor who came often, a little girl named Aki. Her grandmother owned the plum trees outside and lived across the street. Each afternoon after school, Aki would stop by her satchel, bouncing against her knees, and sit on the counter watching Hiroto work. "Why so many clocks?" she once asked. "Isn't one enough?" He chuckled. "Would you say one song is enough?" Aki thought about it. "But they all sound different. That's why it's beautiful," Hiroto said, adjusting the hands of a small pocket watch. "Each one keeps time in its own way, and yet they all belong to the same day." She nodded, though she didn't quite understand. What she liked most was how quiet the shop felt. Even when dozens of clocks ticked, there was no chaos, only a gentle weaving, like rain on a roof. It made her heart slow down, made her forget the noisy world outside. Years passed, and the seasons folded into each other like pages of a worn book. The plum trees bloomed shed and bloomed again. Aki grew taller. Her voice changed. She kept visiting, but less often, as school and friends and the restless world began to call her away. Hiroto never minded. He would still glance at the door each afternoon, as if expecting her. But if she didn't come, he simply went on winding the clocks. He had learned that everything, even affection, must move at its own pace. One autumn evening, a letter arrived, bearing the crest of a large corporation from the city. It was an offer the company wished to purchase all of Hiroto's clocks for a museum exhibit titled "The Art of Time." They promised a generous sum, enough to make his remaining years comfortable. The letter ended with a polite flourish. "Your work deserves to be admired by the world." Hiroto read it twice. Then he folded it neatly and placed it under a small stone on his workbench. For 3 days, he said nothing to anyone. On the 4th day, he walked to the river, watched the water pass, and returned to the shop. That night, he gathered his clocks and spoke to them softly, as if to children. "They want to take you away," he said, "but the world doesn't need more time. It needs more stillness." He lit a candle, poured himself a cup of tea, and began to work, not to pack, but to build. For the next several weeks, he stayed up late, sketching, shaping, soldering, until his fingers trembled. A new clock began to take form, unlike any he had made before. It had no numbers, no hands, no ticking heart. Only a smooth, round face of white wood and a pendulum carved from glass that seemed to swing without moving. He called it the still clock. When it was done, he hung it on the wall above the others. It made no sound, but the entire shop seemed to change around it. The ticking of the other clocks grew softer, almost reverent. The air thickened with calm. The next morning, Aki came by and found him sitting beneath it, eyes closed, breathing slowly. "It doesn't move," she said. "It does," he whispered, "just not where we can see." "Then how will it tell time?" He opened his eyes and smiled. "Perhaps it doesn't need to." That day, she helped him deliver the clocks that had been promised to customers. They walked through the town's narrow streets, the air cool with the first scent of snow. As they passed the river, Hiroto paused. "Listen," he said. "Do you hear it?" The water. Yes. The river never asks where it's going. It only flows. Maybe time is like that. Aki looked up at him. "Then what do we do?" He thought for a moment. "We learn to float." Winter came heavy that year. Snow pressed against the rooftops, and the sound of the world softened under its weight. Hiroto stayed indoors, wrapping himself in thick robes, drinking tea, watching the white fall outside. The clocks kept their rhythm. Each tick felt like a breath shared between him and the house. Then one night, during a storm that hid even the moon, the wind blew open the shop door. The candle flame bent sideways, and the still clock slipped from its hook, falling to the floor. The sound it made was not a crash, but a sigh. The wood splitting neatly, the pendulum rolling to a stop. Hiroto knelt beside it, tracing the crack with his fingers. It looked, he thought, like the line between two heartbeats. When Aki visited the next morning, she found him sitting there holding the broken clock. "It's gone," she said sadly. "No," he said. "It has simply stopped pretending to measure something endless." He handed her the pendulum, the glass cool against her palm. "Keep this," he said. "When it catches light, remember that even stillness moves." She took it home, confused but grateful. That winter was his last. The cold settled deeper than before, and the shop stayed dark more often than not. On the first morning of spring, when the plum trees began to bloom again, the villagers found the door to the clock shop open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and oil. Hiroto sat in his chair by the window, eyes closed, hands resting on his lap. Around him, every clock had stopped. The silence was perfect, not empty, but full of presence, as if time itself were holding its breath. They buried him on the hill above the town, where the temple bell could reach him each morning. The shop remained untouched for months. And then one day, Aki, now a young woman, unlocked it. She dusted the counters, wound a single clock, and listened. The ticking returned, not hurried, not mournful, just alive. Over the years, she reopened the shop. People began visiting again, drawn by stories of the old clockmaker who built a clock that didn't measure time. Travelers came, listened, and left quieter than they arrived. The still clock still hung on the wall, its crack repaired with gold lacquer, its pendulum missing. Yet those who stood before it swore they could feel something moving inside a pulse beneath the silence. Aki never corrected them. She simply smiled and offered tea as Hiroto once had. Sometimes in the late afternoons, when the light slanted through the window, she would hold the glass pendulum in her hand. It caught the sun and scattered it across the floor in small circles that shimmered and disappeared, shimmered and disappeared. And she would think of Hiroto's words, "We learn to float." If you ever travel through that mountain town and find the old shop step inside, sit quietly among the clocks. Listen not to their ticking, but to the spaces between. You'll find that the air hums with something older than sound, something that reminds you of the moment before you wake, when the world is perfectly still and every breath feels like eternity. And if you look closely, you might see, hanging above the counter, a clock with no hands, no numbers, no ticking, just a smooth white face gleaming faintly in the light. Stand before it long enough, and you may begin to sense it moving, not around or forward, but inward, deep into the quiet center where time forgets to hurry and the heart remembers how to rest. And now, as the final story comes to a close, as the ticking of the clocks within you begins to quiet down, we return to the simplest thing of all the breath, every hand of time, every wave of memory, every rhythm of tonight's stories. They all lead us back to the same place. The stillness that is opening within you. There is no need to understand, no need to try, no need to search for anything more. Let your heart rest. Let sleep arrive like an old friend, gently stepping into the room, touching your forehead with hands made of wind. If tonight your heart feels just a little lighter, if your eyes close a little more easily, or if in this silence you hear a part of yourself being healed, then these stories have fulfilled their small purpose. Thank you for listening, for staying until the very end of this journey. 10 stories about forgiveness, about healing, about peace, and about you. I believe that each night you return to this place, whether weary or calm, you will always find a light waiting for you. The light of stillness, of kindness, of the gentle breath we often forget in our hurried days. If you have found peace in these stories, consider subscribing to the channel so we can meet again each night. Let YouTube bring you back to this place where every sound dissolves into breath, every wound turns into light, and every heart learns how to rest. Wishing you a quiet night, a deep sleep, and a gentle dawn. See you again in the next meditation story.